So what we're going to do in this one is I'm just going to tidy up this image a little bit. So it's got some track marks here in the sand, which we want to get rid of. We can use a lot of tools for this. I'm going to start by duplicating the background layer by pressing Ctrl or Command J, dependent if you're a PC or a Mac user. And for this, I'm going to use the patch tool. So we'll click on the patch tool icon here, and we're just going to draw around one of the areas we'd like to remove. Try this, and then we'll just click and drag to an area of texture that we like the look of. And the patch tool is then going to blend it in, do its best to try and blend it in. Quite nice. We keep going. Now you can't use this on an empty layer, so that's why I'm doing this on a duplicate of the background layer. Okay, now I'll just do a couple more of these. You don't have to go crazy. In this example, I'm just trying to do a little bit of tidying up. There we go. Maybe some of these little bits, like this little bit of a stick there. Anything that stands out. There's a little something here, because the more you, within reason, the more you simplify the scene, the clearer the important objects will stick out. So now we've got that. This is obviously a big scene with the pyramids in the middle. Now, another thing that I notice is the horizon's not straight at all. So if you press Command or Control R to bring up the rulers guides here, you can now drag a line down, and you can just see how the horizon line is very much not straight. So there's a couple of ways you can deal with this. You can either just manually rotate the whole layer by going into Transform Selection, Command or Control T on the layer, or you've got the layer highlighted and you press V for the Move tool, or click on the Move tool. You can then click on Transform Controls to activate them, and you can then click and manually level the image like that. If you want another way to do that, that's a little bit quicker, then you can go to the ruler tool, which is actually under the eyedropper icon here. And what you can do here is just draw a line, follow your actual horizon. So ignore the straight guide that I've got on the screen. So we see we've drawn this new line on the slanted horizon, and then just click Straighten Layer, and that will straight away sort out that layer for you. Now, if I turn the layer beneath off, obviously it's had to rotate it. It's had to rotate it a bit in order to get the horizon straight. So now we can either crop this in to just get rid of these blank bits, or we can do Magic Replace. Now, just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to crop this in. Click on the crop tool. I just set the mode to free, which means I can crop it to wherever I want. And in this instance, I'm going to drag that in, just so we're cropping out some of these bits. See how it's affected the top. And while we're here, we could have a look at a just a general recrop of the image. If I zoom out a bit, press Control or Command plus and minus. Now, I think there's too much sky here. If this is for me personally, when you put the crop tool on and you get this grid, it's like a rule of thirds grid. And for good composition, generally speaking, you want things that either lie on the two horizontal lines or the two vertical lines or the points where they intersect. Obviously, that's a very general rule, but it's one that is followed by, you know, a lot of basic compositional photos, famous photographs over time, portraits, anything like that. A lot of them do fit into this basic rule set of composition. So I'm just going to bring this down, recrop this so that the horizon line in the background is now actually level with the bottom line of the crop grid, so the rule of thirds crop grid. I'm not going for a particular aspect ratio or anything here. I'm just going to do what looks good. Press enter to accept that. And now we've got that, what I believe is a much more interesting and balanced crop. Now, one more thing I want to do to this before I finish is I want to enhance the sky a little bit. I don't want it to be too blue because it's, sorry, let me just delete that curves. I don't want it to be too blue just because I think I don't want it to look too cartoony because it's quite a dusky shot, obviously, with it being pyramids and sand. But I'm just going to go to hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm just going to go straight down to select the blue as the range. And I'm just going to bump the saturation up just a tiny bit. Now we're doing that, so it's only going to select tones in the image that it thinks or it deems to be in blue. So we've just added a little bit of extra color to that. And that's what I would do to that image. So today I'm going to be looking at this image, which is something I've just downloaded. The link is in the description box for you to follow along if you like. And what I like about this shot is the simplicity of the composition with the colors as well. These lines really draw your eye into the cyclist, and the color red obviously plays a big part. So I'm just going to duplicate the background layer, Command or Control J. As always with these type of general edit videos that I'm doing now, it's completely unrehearsed, so this is all real time. I'm just going through my initial thought processes on exactly what I'm going to be editing. So the first thing that I see is a lot of like scratches and dirt on the road. So I'm just going to clean these, and you can use whatever tool you fancy to do these. We can use the patch tool as I'm trying here. I'm just getting rid of these. I don't know if there's just dirt or patches of oil on the floor. Don't have to go crazy because it is a road. It's going to have signs of use, but we just want to get rid of the most distracting elements. And you'll find this is something I mention a lot on these videos, is just try to get some of the bigger distractions out of the way first. And if you're unsure, zoom out. Just make sure there's nothing too bad catching your eye. Again, it's not a beauty portrait image. You don't have to go crazy on this. So that to me will be sufficient for an initial cleanup. Now I'm going to check at this point, what do I actually want to do from this image? So I'd like to strengthen the reds on the floor, the red lines. I'd just like to increase the boldness of those. So it's not quite matching his clothes, but getting there. And then I may try and change the color of his bike frame as well, just because I'm not sure that green is really benefiting the image. Let's think about how we'd strengthen these red lines. Now, there are many ways you can target individual colors. You can do the hue saturation, and then we can choose red, and then we can maybe bump up the saturation, and that works quite well. And then we just have to mask it out, brush it out around the cyclist, otherwise it's going to make him go overly saturated as well, because he's got red in his skin and obviously on his clothes. That's a very valid way. There's another way we can do it, which you can go to select color range, and then you can just click on the color, click on an example of the red, and then you can play with this fuzziness slider here until you see most of the areas in white that you want to actually affect. And that's the benefit of doing it this way, is it will then give you a layer mask. It will put it as a live selection, a layer mask. So then if you wanted to put another adjustment on, like curves in this case with a red channel, you can then change the color of red, but you've also got a layer mask you can then work with and refine later. So if you wanted to, I'm just going to do this for now. So from that selection, the selection was live, so I just clicked the curves adjustment layer, and it turned that selection that we'd just created previously into a layer mask for this curve. The channel I've changed to red, so I can now affect just the red tones with the curve using the layer mask I've created. I hope that makes sense. So I'm just going to boost that up a tiny little bit, and I'm just going to go down here and press B for my brush tool and make sure the foreground color is black. And I'm just going to manually just brush over any areas of the cyclist that seem to be affected by the extra saturation. With small subjects, I often find that just brushing it by hand like this is accurate enough so that you don't have to spend ages doing like a pen tool path or something for such a small object. Just get the brush on the layer mask. So there we go. So that's the before and that's the after. So I've really made those red lines pop. Now you could go in and tidy these up as well, clean some of the marks from this red area, but I'm not going to, with the exception of this line here down the middle. It's just bother remove for some reason. So let's use a different tool let's use the healing brush tool. So hold down the Alt key, click in an area that you want to choose, and then you can just paint down with that, and we can just knock that back. You can just use the, in fact, just checking I don't just stand right picking up where it's not, and there's almost like some slight transparency on that associated with that, which there shouldn't be. But anyway, oh yeah, it's because, see, it's always worth checking the layer mask. So even though we've cleaned that layer underneath, let me turn the curves adjustment. So it's the importance of, I think it's the importance of me doing things unrehearsed now, because it shows you the kind of mistakes that you can make easily, and then how to look out for them. So that dark line is now being caused by a line that was on the original layer mask here. So if I just get white as my foreground color now, and if you alt click on the layer mask, sorry, that's how I'm getting into this preview. If you hold down the alt key and click on the layer mask, you'll get this black and white preview. So anything that's white is that's being affected, anything that's black is not. And so there's an obvious red line down here. A black line down here. So with white as my foreground color on the layer mask, I'm just going to brush that down to get rid of that. Get rid of that line on here. Okay, so that's that done. Okay, after, again, nothing too big on this, just a general little edit. Now the color of his bicycle frame, I am going to keep it green, actually. I do like the green, and I'm going to just crop this now. Recrop this. So click on the crop tool. You can change the aspect ratio to something specific if you like, and then it's fixed, or you can just have it on the free mode and it'll let you recrop it. So I'm just going to take this in a little bit. I'm going to put the cyclist right on this horizontal line here. And now, for my personal tastes, I'm happy with that image now. And what I'm going to do here is I'm looking at an image here, and there's a link to this in the description box if you want to download it for yourself to play around. Now, what I want to do to this image is a very simple color change, but I want to change the color of the jacket to a completely different color. Now, because it's quite a bold magenta-y color, even though it's got a pattern all over it, it should be strong and bold enough to change with the targeted selection, meaning we probably won't have to make any kind of masks or paths or anything like that. So I always like to try with the hue saturation adjustment layer for this kind of thing. And we can either go up to the range option here and click magenta, or if you're unsure on your particular image, if you just click on this little double arrow here, it's the like the color picker or like the color selection area tool. So we just press this, and you can see it's actually gone to red in that area, magenta in that one. So depending on where you click, it's gonna think that bit, or class that bit as either red or magenta. And you can see down at the bottom. Now, if it doesn't give you what you want, we can refine this ourselves manually. But let's just see at the moment what happens when we start dragging the hue slide around. So as you can see, it's doing quite a good job if you don't go too far. So we can push it into more of a red, an orangey red, and it's still looking okay. But then we go further than that and you see what happens. It's got multiple colors in there now. It's not a clean color anymore. And that's because this selection down here is not encompassing enough colors. So you can expand this. As you can see, I'm clicking and dragging here. You can expand these little points to try and capture more of the color, so you get a cleaner color change. The trouble is, the more you push it outwards, the more it could then start affecting other colors in the image, which isn't a problem if you can quickly and roughly mask them out. So if I turn this off, so there we go. If I just turn that off, I turn that back on, I can see that it is affecting some other areas of the image, but they're only tiny little bits here and there. So let's just say I quite like that green, but it's way too saturated, so I'm going to drag the saturation slider right down on this. And I'm going to highlight the layer mask and press Control or Command I, depending on PC or a Mac. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to really roughly brush the mask using white as the foreground color, brush the mask over that area of the jacket just to mask it back in. So no accurate masking or paths need to be done, but because the color change in the end did affect some little bits on the face, and on the skin, I don't want to run the risk of it changing any of those and we're not noticing. Because we targeted the color more precisely than just doing a general hue saturation change with the normal slider, it means that now we can be a lot less careful when we're just brushing that adjustment back in. And this is a great technique for anything that's got like quite solid bold colours and you want to make a fairly substantial change with not much masking. So in this edit, I'm just looking at this image here, which is available for download in the description box as usual. And I'm going to take this one potentially two ways. I thought it'd make quite a nice black and white, but I also want to try and enhance the contrast between the colours whilst keeping the overall look as this kind of hazy, faded appearance, which is actually really nice. So the first thing I want to do, regardless of which of those directions I go in, is just do a bit of general cleanup as usual. So I'm going to create a new blank layer by clicking the new layer icon down here. And all I'm going to do here is zoom out again and think, what are the distractions? What's the story of the images? What's the purpose? What are you trying to get from the image when you look at it, or what do you want people to get from it? So we've got this kind of isolated surfer here with a bright red surfboard walking on this kind of muted beach with hardly any colour, with hazy, misty trees in the background, looking quite desolate and like a bit isolated. But then there's some bits of seaweed and some other sort of marks and dirt on the sand down here, which, because the subject of the photo is so small in the frame overall, these appear quite large and they're very distracted. So we'll get rid of those. Now, there are some of the people in the water here which are very small, and I don't know whether I would take them out or not. I think I'm not going to in this one. I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to tidy up this. Sorry for all the zooming in and out, by the way. I encourage you to do that yourself, just because working at really close in all the time is actually a recipe for missing things. So I'm going to go to the spot healing brush for a change, and let's see, and change the source mode to current and below. So with the spot healing brush, you don't choose an area to copy from like you do with the healing brush or the clone tool. You just swipe it, you either click on a little area or swipe it over an area, and it will try to just blend it into the scenery and get rid of it. Now, it works pretty well for small items like this. If you try and remove much larger items with it, it's not as effective as some of the other techniques. But if you've got a lot of very small things like this you just want to get rid of quickly, and there's not too much detail, you can always go back over it, then it's perfect. Sometimes if you don't get the result, you might just have to go back over it a couple of times, but that's fine. It's also good for if you're doing some portrait retouching and you've got a lot of tiny little spots, pimples, or little bits of dry skin on the face. You can just go over it with the spot healing brush as it's designed for originally, and just quickly get rid of a load of these. Now, not going to go too crazy, but one important thing I am going to really encourage you to do as well is stop every few minutes and just zoom out and look at the picture as a whole, and then decide what else I want to do, because you can spend so much time zoomed in getting rid of and changing tiny things that don't make a difference that it's actually, you might end up making the image worse. So for me now, looking at this zoomed out, it's the bottom left corner of the image is really what I want to tidy up now, which is really just distracting me. Just some of these bigger bits down here. Let's get back to the spot healing brush, which is J is a shortcut for the healing brush tools. And then you can change it down here to get to the spot healing brush if it's not already on it. Just going to do these. Okay. For the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to say that's enough of that. Again, you don't want to go overboard. It needs to look natural. So that's my clean layer. Actually, renaming layers, it's good practice to rename your layers as well to keep track of things. That's my clean layer. Let's look at the surfer. It's actually here. Even when I'm saying that, I am just going to get rid of a couple more things. See how quick it is though with the spot healing brush tool. Just click and they're gone. There we go. So I want to do a colour version or a black and white version. I'll do the colour version first, and then we'll do the black and white as like a secondary option later on. So what I'm going to do is I want to make this board really pop, really stand out. And we've done a similar move to this in a couple of the more recent videos, but I'm going to go to the hue saturation adjustment layer, and I'm going to choose red from the range. So it'll just try to target anything that it sees as red in the image. And this is the only thing in the whole image that it will definitely see as red, or had red influence, because everything else is just washed out pale colours. So now if we play around with the hue and saturation, we can take it wherever we like, because it's just targeting the reds of the image, which also affects the skin, but we can quickly mask that out in a second. And as you can see, it's picking up the reflection nicely as well without having to do any sort of accurate masking at all. So I was tempted to take it to magenta-y pink, but I think it would look more impactful if it was just a really rich red. So I'm going to just take it so tiny bit to the left of the original, so it's not an orangey red, it is more of a pinker red. And I'm going to also increase the saturation, not too much because it'll start to look like a cartoon, but just enough to make it really pop compared to the original. And now, because it's affecting a face, I'm going to press B for my brush tool, make sure the foreground colour is black, so we're going to remove from the mask. And if you see it's white, by the way, a shortcut is if you press the X key, it swaps the background and the foreground colour, so you make sure that black is at the front. And then I'm just going to click over her head, on her skin, over her head, and that's going to take that out. She's so small in the frame overall. I just think that really pops and helps it stand out amongst like the bleakness of the background. Now, one thing we could do with the background is on other images with sky, blue sky and things like that, we've actually tried to enhance the blue sky and enhance the clarity and make everything nicer. I don't really want to do that much here because I don't want to spoil the whole feeling of the original image. And when you're working on stuff for yourself, either if it's things that you've taken or you're doing it for a job, you've got to bear in mind what the overall goal of the original image is. And on this, it's obviously not intended to be a really colourful image. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take a curves adjustment layer, and I'm just going to make sure the channel's on RGB, so it's just affecting the overall lightness and darkness of the image and not individual colours. I'm just going to click somewhere in the middle and just drag it down a little bit. And this is affecting the whole image, but I am just going to mask it in a minute in the sky. And I'm just going to go to the blue. And I'm just going to drag that up. So we've made the image a tiny bit darker and a tiny bit more blue. And what I'm going to do now is go on the layer mask, press Command or Control I to turn that off. So that adjustment is now not activated. And I'm going to press G for the gradient tool, make sure that it's black and white in the colour up here and it's not got any other funny colours. So now we're going to create a gradient of that adjustment using the layer mask to graduate that change in. So do that by clicking at the top and dragging down, maybe to about here. And as you can see, you might be able to tell from that, it's applied it backwards. So it's actually gone from the bottom up. And we can see this by looking at the layer mask. And if you alt-click on the layer mask, you can see black is areas that are supposed to be not affected or will not be affected by the adjustment. Whites are affected. So it's giving us the opposite of what we want. We want the area at the bottom to not be affected. So that's very easy to fix if you do it the wrong way around. You just click on the layer mask and press Control or Command I, and it will invert it. So now, if we alt click on the layer mask again, we've got the adjustment fading in at the top where we want it. And if I turn the layer adjustment on and off now, you can see what that's done. It's just darkened it, so it's taking your eye further down to the image. It's added a tiny bit of blue into the sky, but still kept that hazy aesthetic that the original photographer was going for. So what I'd like to do now is a crop. Now, I'm going to decide on a crop that I like. I'm actually going to go 9:16 on this. And a good rule of thumb is if you get the subjects, anything of importance in the image or focus, either on the vertical or horizontal lines, or the points where they intersect. It's using the rule of thirds for composition. And just coincidentally, when I've done this, the intersecting points of the grid are actually perfectly on the surfer down there. So that's going to put the surfer in a really good point for composition without kind of diminishing the look of the overall image. Because let's not forget, the photographer had the subject very small in it for a reason. So we're not going to zoom in and start cropping it in, because in theory, that's not what the job is, right? If this is your own photo, you can do what you like to it. But we're playing in a scenario here where we've been given this to just do a bit of editing too, touching it up a bit, but not changing the overall story of the shot. So now we've done those adjustments, which are quite subtle, but I think they've made quite a big difference. So that would be the color version. And now we'll do a black and white version. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to use the, I'm just looking for it on here. No, that's the invert. So I'll talk as I look at the black and white adjustment layer, which doesn't appear to be on here for some reason. There we go, black and white. It was right in front of me all along. That's the problem with doing it live. How the black and white filter works, and this is why it's so much better than doing a grayscale version of an image, is now we're in here, it will treat all this. You see they've got these coloured sliders. Now look at the image, look at the surfer. When I move that one, this is red. So it's changing the grey values of the image. So what this tool actually does is it lets you adjust. It makes it black and white, but then it lets you adjust the sort of relative lightness and darkness of the image based on the colour sliders here. So for example, we know that border is red. So if I drag the red slider, it's going to push it towards white one way or more towards black the other way. And this just gives you some control over your black and white conversion, right? So if say the surfboard there, it's merging into the sand behind, because when it's converted to black and white, it looks similar in a tonal range, then you can get this slider and you can push it away so it's get it some separation. You can either make it darker so it stands out more, or you can make it lighter so it stands out more. So it's totally up to you which direction you go in. I quite like it slightly darker, or you could almost make it like a silhouette of the shape if you push it too much. I'm going to leave it about there. And you can see what changes there are for other sliders. Yellow, there's not going to be much, maybe in the skin. That's the same with the red. Bit of change in the skin. Green. No, you think it'd change the trees, but they're so desaturated, there's not enough information there for it to pick up on. Cyan. There's quite a bit of cyan in the overall image, but as you can see, unless you've got a very high quality image to start with, if you push this too much, you can see all these like JPEG artifacts and compression and other sort of gunk comes out. So you need to be careful with this, that you don't, if you start seeing anything like that, then just back off with your selection adjustments, basically. So blue, again, that's the sky, but we're getting the same thing. Look at all this nasty stuff that comes out if you start pushing this too far. So I quite like that. Magenta, it's affecting the board a little bit, but I don't want that. So there's the black and white version. Now we could always add a little bit more contrast if we want. We can put another curves adjustment layer on. And with the RGB, we could just do a very basic S curve. So pull the curve up very slightly towards the top end of the curve near the highlights, and then bring the equivalent part down a tiny bit in the shadow area, and this just creates a tiny little bit of contrast. Again, we don't want to go too much because the overall image was supposed to be quite a low contrast one anyway. In fact, I don't like that, so I'm going to remove it. I'm going to say that's our black and white version, that's our colour version. So we've got this nice shot of a bride here, this portrait shot, which is available for download in the description box. And let's just say in a hypothetical scenario that you've got a load of wedding photos or a lot of sort of portrait photos like this back, and the client or the bride is super happy with everything, but they just want the lips to be have sort of come to life a little bit more. They've chosen matte lipstick, which has dried out even more on the day, and now the lips are looking dull and a bit flat. So I've got a really good tip for doing things like this, and it's so simple, you don't need to do any accurate masking. Just create a blank adjustment layer. Now beef your brush tool and make sure, or start with white as your foreground color, and I'm just going to change the brush so it's quite a bit soft. It doesn't really matter though. And I'm just going to start painting white over the lips. Now, I'm just going to make this a little bit harder just so we don't spill over the edge. Now, it really doesn't matter where you paint here at the moment or how accurate you are, as long as you don't go over the edges of the lips too much. But focus on areas that may potentially have highlight. So now we've got that rough blocked in area of white. This is where the trick comes in. So if we double click to the right hand side of the layer, we'll bring up the layer styles box. Now we're going to go down to this bit here, blend if, towards the bottom center of the box. And it's got current layer, and then there's a slider that says background layer. So we're going to go background layer. So what we want to do here is we're going to tell it to blend out, sort of remove the areas of this white layer that fall into darker values, i.e. shadows and lower midtones, and then only leave it in the areas that are a bit lighter. So let me start showing you what to do. In this instance, get this black triangle at the bottom with this grey triangle in the background layer on the left hand side, so the one in the dark shadow area, and slowly move it to the right, and you'll start to see the pixels on the white layer that we painted starting to kind of blend and fade away, and they start to just cling to the values that are remaining. So at this point, they're only visible over areas on the image underneath, i.e. the bride, of the values that exist between these two arrows now. And if we take it all the way up, they'll basically just disappear because there's nothing that, that value in the image. Sounds more complicated than it is, but all you need to know is just drag this slider and move it along. What we're going to do is just trying to add a bit of a sheen just to the edge of the lips. So don't want to take it too far. So I'm going to do something like that. But you can see it's very rough and pixelated looking and not very authentic and smooth. So this is where a second part of the little trick comes in. If you see the triangles actually split into two smaller triangles, so if you hold the Alt key and click on the right hand side triangle out of the two, you can see we could split the triangle, and you can let go of Alt now and just drag it. If I keep moving this to the right, if you watch the lips, what's going to happen? It's going to smooth the transition between those two. And now I can even play with the other triangle, and you can just get a lot more of a natural effect. I mean, it's quite subtle. Once you've done this a couple of times, you'll be able to do this in like 20 seconds flat. It's super simple. So we click OK now, and we'll turn that on and off. And we've got that. If I zoom out and just turn that on and off, it just makes a really big difference. It's subtle, but it's really realistic. It's not like a solid painted on curve or anything like that you'd do. It's got a really nice subtle quality. And the beauty is, because it's just white on the layer, and now we've got that adjustment affecting the whole layer. If you missed a bit and you wanted to just keep painting over, you could carry on painting that on the lips. It's not doing anything now because the way we've got it adjusted, it's only affecting those part of the lips. And you can actually use this technique for other things. Like, let's say we wanted to just increase the intensity of some of these highlights on the pearls, but we just want to do a couple and we don't want to spend much time. Do the same thing again. I wouldn't use the same layer because it'll all have different values. So I'd just make another adjustment layer. Another blank layer, and again we can say white, and let's just paint over a couple of the pearls just as a test, and then we'll do the same thing. We'll double click the side, go into layer style, go into the background, drag it across drag it to the left whilst looking at the pearls and seeing at what point does it start to latch on enough to just give it a nice little pop of extra white. And when it's got to a point that you feel is right, you can hold Alt click to split the triangles to smooth the transition out. And again, it's quite subtle, but now we've tested it on a couple. What we can do now is just, with white selected, we can just carry on and brush that now wherever we want to add a little bit of extra sparkle to those pearls. It's obviously a bit too much there, so I'm going to back off the opacity. And again, it's just that tricks like that using the blend diff adjustment layer can just allow you to make quite a big difference in not much time at all without the need for any complex masking.